Welcome to another discussion on Talk Talk, the resurrection of Christ. This is such a major event in the history of mankind that we need to look at it very carefully. Is there actual evidence for that? Can we know that it actually happened? I think it's important for Christians and non-Christians to realize that there's no such thing as blind faith in Christianity. Christianity is not only based on our trust in God, but it's based on verifiable facts. So let's look at the resurrection of Christ and see if we have evidence so we can actually also know that it actually happened, apart from just trusting that it did happen. How do we know that Jesus rose from the dead? If someone tells you, "I don't believe the Bible," what evidence do you have for this event? This is a crucial question because Christianity stands or falls on this question. If it proves to be untrue, you can just forget about Christianity and go for another religion. We know that people just don't come back from the dead. And in particular, Christ, who claimed to be God, he claimed that he would rise again. And if he in fact did, then it's important for us to know that maybe he is God and did come back as he predicted. So how will we approach that, and how we will look at the different aspects of this to find enough evidence for this? The resurrection sets Christianity apart from all other religions, as I said. It's in contrast to other religions which cannot be verified by facts. Hinduism, Buddhism, and other religions is an experience that you have to feel and to go through to know the truth, in inverted commas. But Christianity sets itself open to be testable, because if you can prove that Christ did not rise from the dead, Christianity is dead. And Christianity can then really be written off as just a mythical story with no consequence, except that it misled people over millennia into a false story. So how would we look at this systematically to see if it's actually true? What is our sources of knowledge that we can investigate? Firstly, there are non-biblical sources, in other words, sources outside of the Bible that we can investigate, like archaeology and other ancient manuscripts, and then also the biblical manuscripts itself. Then we can look at the reliability of these manuscripts on different points, and that we will go through each of them. And then, is what is written reliable? In other words, is the content reliable? And did people not just write things that they wanted to be true, or simply liars, or people who want to deceive other people? How do we know that it was actually true? So to answer these questions, we have to look at the sources that we have available to see if what was written in the New Testament is actually true and whether it is reliable. So there are three crucial considerations that we have to look at to know that what was actually written in the Bible is true and has happened. So what are the sources that we are looking at? And are these sources reliable in communicating what was originally written in that? And then, was the content that was written reliable? Was it true that was written? Did it actually happen that was written at the time? So our sources of knowledge to prove or to support that the New Testament was true is firstly the ancient manuscripts that were used to reconstruct the Bible. Now there's over 20,000 manuscripts available that one can put together to reconstruct the Bible. And the most important of them is about just over 5,000 ancient Greek manuscripts. And then the extra biblical writings. So in other words, ancient manuscripts that is not Christian or not biblical, and also archaeology, and do the last two actually support what was written in the Bible itself in those original manuscripts. And then if we find these sources are reliable, do we know that the content is reliable? The ancient biblical manuscripts describe the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. So what are the extra biblical sources of knowledge that we have? One is archaeology. And there are many, but I will just mention two examples of what is available to us today. The one is an ossuary of Caiaphas. Now, Caiaphas was a Roman appointed Jewish high priest who sent Jesus to Pontius Pilate for his execution. And this ossuary can be seen in the museum in Jerusalem. And then an inscription of the name of Pontius Pilate on a tablet. Now, he was then the Roman ruler who gave Jesus over to crucifixion. So we know that these two people were actual people. And then the non-biblical external evidence is further the ancient writings that support the New Testament. Now, many people has written about the life of Christ outside of the biblical manuscripts. They described where he lived, where he died, that he did miracles, and that he actually claimed to be God. In fact, we know 60 facts of the life of Jesus Christ from outside the biblical manuscripts. 130 Christian and non-Christian sources, in other words, non-biblical sources, and 17 of these non-Christian sources were written within 100 to 159 years of Jesus' life, all describing where he lived, died, that he did miracles, and that he claimed to be God. And what is the biblical evidence then for the truth of the New Testament? How can we know that from the biblical evidence that we have? So we have numerous ancient manuscripts, and they are evaluated basically on 3 points: the number of copies available, the time gap from the original writing to the earliest manuscripts that's available to us, and the significance in differences between the different manuscripts. And a fourth point that we can look at is, when was the New Testament actually written? Was it soon after Christ lived, or very long, like some people would say 100 or 200 or 300 years, which obviously blurs the authenticity of the writings. So if we look at the ancient books of the world that gives us the history of the world and that we rely on, we will look at the time lapse from the date it was written to the earliest manuscripts, and also the numbers of copies available to us. So what are these books, and how can that compare with the New Testament? Now, Homer's Iliad is a recount of the significant evidence of the final weeks of the Trojan War. And it's really a Bible of ancient Greeks. Now, that time lapse from the date it was written to the earliest manuscript was 400 years, and there's 643 manuscripts available. And we will come back to that again. Now, if you look at the Bible manuscripts, this is a list of the earliest manuscripts we have available about the Bible. The earliest one is John 18 to John 33, and it was written around about 96 AD, and the earliest manuscripts is 125 AD. So approximate time span of 29 years between the original and the first manuscripts that we have. And then we can go through the list, times getting longer and longer, but still much shorter than what we see of all the other ancient manuscripts that's available to us, that we can assess and look at the authenticity of these books and these ancient manuscripts. As we said, Homer's Iliad was written 400 years, is the earliest manuscripts that we have of what was written, and there's 643 manuscripts available. And you can go through the list and compare that with the New Testament, 35 years and 5,700, that is just Greek manuscripts available. And then there's 400,000 differences in the New Testament manuscript between the different manuscripts. Now you might say that is a lot of differences, but they've shown that these is mainly spelling differences and mainly different synonyms that were used. There were no differences in the core message of Christianity, in other words, in the doctrines of Christianity. So when was the New Testament written? We know that Jesus died around about AD 30. The Romans destroyed the temple as well as Jerusalem around about 16 AD. 70 AD. In the 60s, in other words, in the decade before the Jerusalem and the temple was destroyed, James, Peter, and Paul, major writers of the New Testament, were all killed. So it's very strange that none of them has mentioned the destruction of the temple in any of their writings, which implicates that they wrote it before the destruction of the temple. In other words, about 35 years since the events actually happened. So to summarize this first part is, what are the sources and are they reliable? It actually gives us confidence that what we read in the New Testament is what was written 2,000 years ago, on the grounds of the following points that we've gone through. There's a large number of manuscripts available. New Testament, over 5,000 Greek manuscripts. There's a very short period from the time where they were written to the first manuscripts. There's insignificant differences between the copies, and there's a short time between the actual events and when the original was written. So it gives us confidence to know that that is written in the New Testament from these biblical and extra-biblical sources are actually reliable. So how do we know then that what's written in them is actually true? So what is written that actually happened? And was this reliable and honest witnesses that has actually written these things down? And we have to look at different events that took place and see if that actually makes sense what is written there. It caused a radical and dramatic changes in the lives of the people that said that they saw Christ. Like the followers of Christ were timid, scared followers and became bold preachers of the gospel, and also the dramatic changes that took place in Paul's life. And further, James, who was the brother of Jesus, was always a skeptic of Jesus. He never believed that he was the actual Messiah, the Son of God. But after the resurrection, he became one of the big followers of Christ and a leader of the Christian faith in Jerusalem. The church exploded into a worldwide movement. So something dramatic have touched these people's lives and changed them, and changed people's lives even today. Christ said before he ascended to heaven, "I'm always with you." And it's this tangible presence that we read about that's still in Christians' hearts, and a love that compels them to bring this message of the resurrection forward. So major changes took place in people's lives at that time and now because of the fact that they were convinced of the risen Christ, and we experience this even to today. So the available facts in the manuscripts makes most sense in coherence and logical progression of the narratives. As we read through it, things just fit together, and it argues for the truth of the resurrection. So Gary Habermas writes that on the basis of accepted principles of textual and historical analysis, the gospel records are found to be trustworthy and historical documents about the primary source concerning the life of Jesus Christ. Now, William Lane Craig and Gary Habermas are very well-known biblical scholars and researchers on this subject. And they've put together some historical data, 12 historical facts from the ancient biblical and extra-biblical manuscripts that even the harshest and most skeptical critics would consider as true. Jesus died, was buried. His death caused disciples to despair and lose hope. The tomb was discovered empty. The disciples had experienced what they believed was the literal appearance of the risen Jesus, and that transformed them to bold proclaimers of his death and resurrection. This message became the center of the Christian faith. So all the facts available that we have, that we read, just fits in so well and argue for the resurrection. All theories that try to explain away the resurrection, the empty tomb, fail. And we have to yield to the conclusion that Paul and the disciples really saw the risen Christ because of the dramatic changes that took place in their lives. And liars, in fact, do not make martyrs. As we know, almost all of them were martyred to death for what they believe. So the theories that try to explain away the resurrection, like the unknown tomb, the wrong tomb, the legend theory, twin theory, hallucination theory, there are many theories that came up, but none of these fits in with the facts that we have. Lord Darling, a former Lord Chief Justice of England, wrote in the book, The Day Death Died, on that greatest point, the resurrection of Christ, we are not merely asked to have faith, in other words, but the blind faith that I spoke about. In its favor as a living truth, there exists such overwhelming evidence, positive and negative, factual and circumstantial, that no intelligent jury in the world could fail to bring in the verdict that the resurrection story is true. Jesus claimed to be a deity, and he was raised from the dead. It's a very strong argument for his deity. His resurrection would confirm his claims, including his claim to be God. If he was indeed raised from the dead, we should give him our fullest attention and adoration.